Chapter 13. A Tyrant's Reward. Sarah had remained quiet throughout the ordeal. She did not cry, nor did she plead for her life. Though her death seemed more and more likely, the thought of Urkai's coinciding doom made it almost worthwhile to her. Ektheon, however, was not about to exchange Sarah's life for Urkai's defeat. Reaching back into his quiver, he drew his only remaining arrow. He had just one chance. And so, from the lofty heights of the theater's balcony, the elven prince took aim. It would be the most difficult shot he would ever attempt in his life. There was no margin for error. If the shot was even the slightest bit off, the arrow could strike Sarah instead of Urkai. Ektheon drew a deep breath as he steadied his arm. Intensity glowed in his eyes as he viewed his target. He prayed that his aim would not stray. The seconds following the release of the arrow seemed to last an eternity. Tried and true, the deadly bolt cut through the shadowy heights of the theater, reaching its mark on the stage below. Ektheon's aim could not have been better. The feathery shaft pierced the ear of the tyrant, embedding itself deep within his skull. The other warriors watched in amazement as Urkai's body fell lifelessly to the floor, leaving Sarah unharmed. There was a silent pause as the confused spectators absorbed the unbelievable scene. Then Sarah began to weep with joy. "He is dead," she cried. "This terrible nightmare has finally come to an end." "Yes, but who did it?" Dyaxes pondered. "I did," Ektheon shouted jubilantly. He was even more amazed than the others were by the accuracy of his shot. Though the shadows concealed his identity, Tamark and Dyaxes both recognized the prince's voice. "Ektheon!" Tamark exclaimed in surprise. "Come down, brave warrior, and receive your proper credit," the princess requested. That was an invitation the prince could not refuse, though he was not sure how to get down to the stage. He left the balcony and returned to the hall, frantically searching for the staircase. It took him a few minutes, but he finally found his way down to the main floor of the theater. "I cannot believe you made that shot," Dyaxes said in disbelief. "I am very impressed." "As am I," Sarah said. "It was truly a remarkable display of skill. You must be a talented warrior indeed to have made such a shot. The others here appear to have been in your company before. Unfortunately, I have not had the same privilege." Tamark took the liberty of making the introduction. "Ektheon, it gives me great joy to present my sister, Princess Sarah. Dear sister, I present to you Ektheon, Prince of Teluvia." Ektheon blushed as he kissed the young lady's hand. The young prince was completely captivated by the beauty of the Ursel woman. Despite all that she had been through, she looked remarkably brilliant. Her light brown hair was gathered in lovely fashion about her shoulders. Lips as red as the finest rose, her eyes were as emerald gems holding Ektheon spellbound. He found it terribly difficult to concentrate on anything else while in her presence. "It is indeed a pleasure to meet you, Your Majesty," Ektheon said to her. "If it pleases your highness," Dyaxes interrupted, "Prince Ektheon and I must soon be on our way. Though Urkai is dead, his war is still being waged in Teluvia. For us, there is still much fighting to be done." "You are quite right, Dyaxes," Tamark said. "With all the excitement, I had forgotten that our allies are still in great danger. After all, that was the reason you became involved in the first place. Though the circumstances that brought you here are most unfortunate, your arrival was indeed a blessing for my people and myself. There is still much to be done in Ursulus to secure peace, but thanks to you and your people, the balance of power in this country has swayed back into righteous hands. I only hope we are as successful in reclaiming Teluvia," Ektheon said. "With such courageous souls fighting for her, I cannot imagine anything less," Sarah said. "I know you must return home quickly, but please do not go now. I am sure you and your soldiers could use a good night's rest before moving on. Besides, we are in this together. Just as your soldiers fought for Ursulus, we will help you fight for your country. Stay the night in our city, and together we will ride into battle tomorrow." Though Dyaxes was anxious to return to Teluvia, he could not refuse the kind maiden's offer. By nightfall, The city was completely secured, and the people were free to walk the streets without fear. A festival was held that night in honor of the liberation of Ursulus. It was a time to eat, drink, and be merry. It was an opportunity to share battle stories as well. There was much catching up to do, and there was no better time to do it. The division of the army at Chalcis had left many mysteries as to how the two parties had fared during the battle. Cerberus had been anxiously waiting to share his accounts of danger and excitement with his brother, only to take a back seat to Ecthion's daring tale. "Leave it to you to find a way to show me up," Cerberus quipped as he and his brother were reunited in the palace ballroom. That is not to say that Cerberus had done little throughout the war. In fact, he had faced greater danger and fiercer combat than his suddenly famous brother. Ectheon listened attentively as his brother recounted the march on Ivansport. "The opposition we faced was overwhelming," Cerberus recalled. "But just as Dyaxes had hoped, there was considerable unrest within the city. When we attacked, the citizens of the city found the courage to rise up and join us. However, there were many soldiers, and their pride prevented them from surrendering. A great deal of blood was shed before it was all over. So then Dyaxes got this brilliant idea to disguise ourselves as Ursul soldiers and ride to Ursus. His thought was that he would approach you and Tamark and have you feign surrender and then ride into the city unimpeded. But when we arrived, we saw the battle was already taking place, and well, you know the rest. If you will excuse me, I think I will retire to plan tomorrow's journey," Dyaxes said as he rose from his seat at the table where Tamark, Sarah, Ectheon, and Cerberus were also sitting. "We have a long, hard day ahead of us. Perhaps you might wish to turn in as well before too long." His suggestion was directed at the two young princes, who seemed to be so caught up in recent events that they had forgotten their true goal. "Actually, I am not tired at all," Cerberus said. "I think that is Dyax's way of telling us we should go to bed now," Ectheon explained to his rambunctious brother. "Yes, it is rather late," Sarah agreed, "and there is so much to do tomorrow. However, I wish to stay up a while longer. It has been a long time since I've been able to walk the halls of this palace in peace." "Can I walk with you?" Ectheon requested. "It would be a wonderful opportunity to just talk and get to know each other better. From all your brother has said about you, you sound like a very interesting person." "My brother seems to be rather quick to talk me up to others," Sarah said as a weak smile crossed her lips, especially dashing young warriors. "I would greatly enjoy your company, Ectheon, but right now, I really wish to be alone. Perhaps we can talk another time." "Yes, perhaps another time," Ectheon said in a tone that barely masked his disappointment. He reluctantly bowed to the fair princess and bid her a good night. Though the warriors retired to the tranquility of the palace bedchambers, the festivities carried on well into the night as the Ursuls continued to celebrate their new freedom. Despite the immense physical and psychological strain of the day's events, Ectheon found himself unable to sleep. Instead, he stood gazing out the window of his chamber. Lights flickered on the streets below, and shouting could be heard occasionally in the distance. However, it was not the shouting that was keeping the prince awake. There was much on Ectheon's mind. The journey and the battles the coming days would bring were of great concern to him, but there was something else that concerned him even more. Though Tamark had warned him not to do so, Ectheon found himself falling in love with Sarah. If there was any doubt about his feelings for her before, seeing her face to face confirmed what he had known all along. This was the woman with whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life. The problem was, it seemed as though Sarah would prefer to spend the rest of her life alone. It was true that Dellen's betrayal had scarred the princess's emotions terribly. Such pain is hard to forget. How sad it was to find that someone so sure and confident on the outside was so afraid on the inside. Fear was what Sarah felt, the fear of allowing herself to grow so close to a person, only to be betrayed again. Her heart held the courage to face the executioner's blade without so much as a tear, yet she trembled at the thought of placing her emotions in another's hands. She had decided that living without love was better than risking the pain of another broken heart. It would take more than flattery and feats of bravery to win over the princess. After all, Delin had done all of that, and it said nothing about his character. Ectheon would have to prove to Sarah that she could trust him. He would have to break through the rigid walls that she had built around her heart. This would not be an easy task, but for Ectheon it seemed well worth the effort. If all else failed, he would rely on the most effective method of all, persistence. As Ectheon's thoughts ventured down the paths of romance, a cold wind blew in his face. A storm was coming up from the west. The breeze served to alert his mind to the more relevant problem at hand. Sarah's love would have to be won over time. The freedom of Teluvia could not wait. Sleep was what he needed now. The previous night's wind brought with it a severe storm. A prelude to the coming winter, the freezing rain relentlessly pelted the warriors as they gathered outside the city in preparation for the journey to Teluvia. The wintry squall whipped out of the northwest, straightening the red and black flags that waved above the city gates. "This weather is absolutely abominable," Cerebus shouted, attempting to make his voice heard over the screaming wind. "Perhaps we should wait until it lets up a bit before starting our journey." That was a popular idea among the soldiers, but Diaxes thought differently. "No, we cannot wait any longer," the commander insisted. His dark cloak was wrapped tightly about him, concealing most of his face. His eyes remained visible, and a fire glowed in them that remained unquenched by the downpour. "Time is precious. Storm or no storm, we must reach Teluvia." Diax's words, which normally roused those around him, did little to motivate the rain-soaked soldiers. However, it was enough to set them in motion. As they began their eastward march, the warriors glanced back at the warmth and safety that they were leaving behind. Ursus slowly sank back into the distance until even its lofty towers could no longer be seen. Upon leaving Ursus, the party divided into two groups. Throughout the chaos of recent days, the plight of Alcadia and its besieged city, Ildor, had been nearly forgotten. Therefore, Sarah, who was held in high regard by the forest folk, led a large contingent of Ursals southeast to Ildor. The Teluvians, along with Tamark, and a group of Ursals, headed due east for the war-torn Golden Forest. The young king had left in place men he could trust to manage the affairs of the kingdom until he returned. The march to Teluvia seemed to last an eternity. Not once did the cruel wind let up. In fact, Cerebus insisted that it had grown fiercer. And though Diaxes dismissed the young elf's whining for the most part, he was well aware of the problem the weather was presenting. It had already slowed the walking of the soldiers to half speed, a pace that was growing increasingly slower as the hours dragged on. Near the end of the third straight day of marching through the tempest, a glimmer of hope appeared on the rapidly darkening eastern horizon. "The forest!" Ectheon shouted. The sight of the woods and the shelter they would provide served to drastically improve the morale of the soldiers. It improved their pace as well. Soon, the exhausted soldiers found themselves under the canopy of leaves. Diaxes realized that they would have to stop and rest soon. Even though they were only a few hours away from the royal city, the commander knew his army would be in no condition to fight after such a lengthy march. Eluthian and his army would have to hold out for another night,